It is 2 minutes past 2 in the morning, April 15th, 1912. You are wading through black water in a corridor below E-deck. The ice-cold Atlantic is up to your knees and rising at a rate you can feel against your shins. The electric lights flickered for the last time about 20 seconds ago, and then they went out. You have been moving in darkness ever since. Your eyes are useless. You are following the lift of the deck under your bare feet. You know the deck is sloping toward the bow, and the bow is going under, so you walk away from the bow. In your trouser pocket, against your thigh, you can feel the cold brass of your father's pocket watch. He gave it to you in 1909, 3 months before he died. He carried it on the Olympic. It is a Waltham. The hands are moving. The water reaches your pocket. The watch stops moving. You do not yet know it has stopped. You will not know it has stopped until dawn, when you can see it in your hand on the deck of the Carpathia. It will be stopped forever at 12 minutes before 2:30. That is the moment, in the dark of your trouser pocket, when the cold North Atlantic killed your father's watch. 2 minutes later, the ship will be gone. March 1912. You are 23 years old. You are standing on the dock at Liverpool watching the new ship, the Titanic, finish her sea trials. She is the largest moving object that has ever been built by human hands. She is 882 feet from stem to stern. She has 159 furnaces. She needs 162 men on watch to feed them, day and night, without stopping, ever. Your father had been one of those men, 3 years ago, on the Olympic. He carried coal 12 hours a day in 50 degrees of heat. He died of black lung at 49. He left you the watch and a pair of boots. You sign your name on the crew manifest. Fireman, boiler room 6, watch 4, £6, 10 shillings a month, plus food, plus passage to New York and back. It is more money than you have ever been offered in your life. The clerk asks if you can read. You say yes. He gives you a White Star Line booklet titled Duties of the Stoker. You do not open it. You already know. Friday night. Your watch starts at 10 in the evening. You climb down through E-deck, down through the fireman's tunnel along the keel, down past the coal bunkers, where the trimmers are still moving coal toward the boilers, down into boiler room 6. Boiler room 6 is the most forward of the 6 boiler rooms. It contains 5 boilers, 10 furnaces, 25 men on watch. The boilers are 20 feet tall. They are painted black. They glow orange where the firebox doors meet the steel. You take your slice bar from the rack. The slice bar is a 5-foot length of iron used to break up the clinkers, the fused lumps of slag that form on the grate. You take a long pull of warm water from the bucket hanging on the hook above your station. The temperature in the room is already 42 degrees centigrade and rising. By the end of your watch, it will be over 50. The bell on the engine telegraph rings up a head full from the bridge. The chief engineer has been told by Captain Smith to make 23 knots. The fastest the Titanic has ever steamed. Every fire must burn at its limit. You shovel coal. 12 shovels per fire. When you finish the 12th fire, you start again at the first. You glance at your father's watch. 10 o'clock exactly. For an hour and a half, there is nothing in your mind. Shovel after shovel. You have stripped to the waist within 10 minutes. Every stoker does. The black coal dust mixes with your sweat and makes a paste that smells like rust and ash. You drink water every 20 minutes. You have to, or you faint, and a fainting stoker is dead within 5 minutes from the heat. Above you, far above you, the first-class passengers are finishing dinner. The veranda cafe is serving demitasse. The orchestra is playing a Strauss waltz. None of this enters your awareness. You count to 12 shovels per fire. The firebox doors glow orange when you swing them open. When you swing them shut, your shadow leaps 30 feet across the bulkhead and disappears. You think about nothing. 1 minute before midnight, by your father's watch. You feel it before you hear it. The plate deck under your bare feet tilts half an inch to port and then resettles. A long, low, scraping sound, not a crash, not a collision in the way you imagine one, but a long iron sigh running the length of the ship from bow to stern, lasting 9 full seconds, and then stopping. You look up. Frederick Barrett, your watch leader, has already looked up. at the watertight indicator above the door to boiler room 5. The indicator is a small electric lamp. It has just gone from white to red. Barrett says one word. Ice. You glance at the watch, 11:39 in the evening. You will think about this minute, this single minute, for the rest of your life. You did not yet understand. You did not yet feel afraid. The boilers were still burning. The men were still shoveling. For one more minute, you were still safe. 1 minute later, the starboard wall of boiler room 6, the wall on the side of the ship where the iceberg had passed, split open along a riveted seam. The sound was like a rifle shot. The water that came through was dark, was cold beyond cold, was already 3 feet deep within 20 seconds. It carried with it fragments of red lead paint from the inside of the hull. It smelled of brine and iron. Barrett shouted, "All hands up the ladder! Now, now!" 25 men ran for the ladder. The ladder rose vertically through a hatch in the deck above into boiler room 5. The ladder could take one man at a time. You counted them as they went. You did not know you were counting. You were doing it the way a stoker counts shovels, without thought, automatic. 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time you reached the ladder yourself, the water was at your waist, and the steel rivets in the wall were popping like gunshots, one by one, behind you. 7 men did not make it to the ladder. You knew their names. You had drunk warm water from the same bucket as them an hour before. You will not say their names in this account, because you said them every night for 46 years in your prayers, and you are tired now. You were halfway up the ladder when the watertight door at the bottom, the door between boiler room 6 and boiler room 5, began to close. The watertight doors on the Titanic were operated hydraulically from a single switch on the bridge. First Officer Murdoch threw that switch at 23:40 exactly. The doors took 30 seconds to descend, hydraulically, from open to fully closed. You heard it begin. The grinding of the hydraulic ram, the hiss of compressed air being released, the slow descent of 4 inches of solid steel. 3 men below you, who had not yet reached the ladder, made it. They scrambled up, threw themselves through the rectangular hatch into boiler room 5, rolled clear. 4 men below them did not make it. You saw them through the closing gap. You saw their faces. The door reached the floor of boiler room 6 with a clang that you will hear for the next 46 years every time you close any door at all. Boiler room 6 was a sealed steel tomb. 4 men were inside it. Their boilers were still glowing red as the cold sea poured around their feet. For 35 minutes, boiler room 5 held. The bulkhead between 5 and 6 was taking the pressure of 14 feet of seawater on the other side. It groaned. Rivets were popping along the seam. Water was seeping through. The men around you were quiet. We do not speak in the boiler room when we work. We did not speak now either. At 25 past midnight, the chief engineer himself came down the ladder. His name was Joseph Bell. You had never met him. You knew his voice only as the man who replied to the bridge on the engine telegraph. He was white. His uniform was wet. He said, "Draw the fires in all boilers in this room. Keep just enough steam to feed the dynamos." You understood. The dynamos generated the ship's electricity. The electricity ran the lights stayed on as long as the dynamos turned. The dynamos turned as long as you kept the steam up. Joseph Bell was asking you to keep the lights on for the passengers above. He was asking you to do this from inside a boiler room that was flooding around your ankles. You drew the fires. You raked the burning coal out of the furnace and threw water from a hose on it to kill it. The steam from the dying fires filled the room with a fog that you could not see through. You did this for 40 more minutes. You did not stop. Joseph Bell did not leave the engine room that night. None of the 36 engineers did. None survived. At 1:30 in the morning, the chief engineer's assistant came back down. He said, "That's all, lads. You're dismissed. Get to the boats if you can." Stokers were not assigned to lifeboat stations. Stokers did not exist for the boat drill. Officially, there was no one waiting for you on the boat deck. There were no women and children for you to escort. You were a man with coal on your face, wearing a soaked singlet, climbing through corridors that were not yours. E-deck, D-deck, C-deck, B deck. Each was a different world. On E deck, the third-class passengers were still trying to find the gate to the upper decks. On B deck, a steward was carrying a tray of demitasse to a stateroom that he would never reach. On A deck, you walked past a woman in a long blue silk gown. She was standing on the open promenade beside Lifeboat 8. An officer was telling her to step in. She was refusing. She was saying, "I will not leave my husband." You passed her. Neither of you spoke. You were too tired to feel anything. She did not see you. The boat deck was lit electric bright, and the sea below was black. You glanced at your father's watch, 25 past 1. The hands were still moving. At 2 minutes past 2 in the morning, you reached the boat deck. Most of the lifeboats were gone. The boat deck was tilting forward and to starboard. The bow was already under water. You could see this. The bow was under water and the stern was rising. The propellers, normally 70 feet below the waterline, were beginning to come into the air. Fifth Officer Harold Lowe was loading Lifeboat 14 portside. Lowe was the only officer on the Titanic who, after launching his boat, would steer back into the wreckage and pull swimmers from the freezing water. He saved 53 people that night. He saved you. He saw you standing at the railing. He saw your singlet, your blackened arms, your bare feet. He shouted, "You, get in, take an oar." You stepped into the lifeboat. The lifeboat was lowered 70 feet to the water. The fall was jerky. One of the davits was sticking, and at one point the bow dropped 6 feet faster than the stern. A child fell against your shoulder. You held the child upright. Neither of you spoke. The lifeboat hit the water at 2 minutes past 2 in the morning. You pulled at the oar with men who, 10 hours before, had been first-class passengers and stewards and a single fireman. You pulled away from the Titanic. The ship was 100 yards away, 200, 300. The stern was high in the air now, the propellers were fully exposed, the lights were still on. Every porthole, every promenade lamp, every electric bulb on every deck was burning yellow against the black North Atlantic. The lights were on because somewhere in the engine room you had just left, 36 men were still feeding the dynamos. You did not know their names. You did not know any of them would survive. They did not. They drowned at their stations within the next 15 minutes. In your trouser pocket, the cold water finally reached the brass of your father's Waltham pocket watch. The mechanism stopped. The hands stopped at 12 minutes before 2:30. You did not feel it stop. You felt nothing in your pocket. You were watching the ship. At 20 past 2, the lights blinked once and went out. At 22 past 2, the ship broke in half between the third and fourth funnels. The break was visible against the stars. The bow section sank within 90 seconds. The stern righted itself briefly, hung at the vertical for what felt like a minute, and then slid under. The screams of the swimming continued for more than half an hour. There were over 1,500 of them. By 3 in the morning, fewer than 200 remained alive in the water. By 4, fewer than 30. At 10 past 4 in the morning, the Cunarder Carpathia arrived. She had steamed at full emergency speed through the same ice field that had sunk the Titanic. Her captain, Arthur Rostron, had thrown every ounce of pressure into her own boilers, knowing he might blow them. The boilers held. You climbed a rope ladder up her side with frozen hands. Someone gave you a wool blanket. Someone gave you a mug of tea. The tea was scalding. You held the mug with both hands because your hands were shaking too hard to hold it with one. You were one of 35 stokers, out of 162 on watch that night, to survive. The United States Senate inquiry began 6 days later in New York. It would last 9 weeks. It would call 82 witnesses. Frederick Barrett, your watch leader, was called. You were not. The Senate in 1912 did not call ordinary stokers to testify. They were not considered necessary witnesses to the disaster they had stood inside. For 43 years, no one asked you what had happened in Boiler Room 6. Then, in 1955, a young American journalist named Walter Lord visited you in your terraced house in Southampton. You were 76. He was writing a book called A Night to Remember. He sat in your kitchen and he asked you very politely to tell him what it had been like in the engine room. You went to the mantelpiece and you took down your father's Waltham pocket watch. You laid it on the table between you. The hands had been stopped at 12 minutes before 2:30 for 43 years. You said, "It was hot, and then it was very cold." Walter Lord wrote that sentence down. You can find it in his book, on page 116, in the chapter called Below.